Hi, I'm Rob from robknowphoto.com, and in today's video I'm going to be telling you about that kind of scary mode on our camera. That is M for manual mode. I'm going to talk about why you should try and have a go at it, and how you can have a go on it. Because when you're new to DSLRs, or even ordinary SLRs, film cameras, that sort of thing, manual mode can be a little bit intimidating. And even if you've been shooting for a long time, we tend to get stuck in like aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode, when really manual mode's there for the taking. But it is the mode in which you have total creative control over what your camera does. You can choose your aperture to get the depth of field look you want, whether that be a massive depth of field for a landscape or short for a portrait work. You can choose your shutter speed, so you can have a really fast shutter speed to freeze action, or a longer shutter speed to blur water to get smoky water, or maybe you're doing a panning shot so you can get that feeling of speed into your photographs. And apart from aperture and shutter our aperture and our shutter speed, we also have ISO, which is how sensitive our camera is to light. In the old days, this would have been choosing which film to put in it, but with modern digital cameras, we can set the ISO on the fly. We can go up and down and we can choose the sensitivity that we want. So I guess, the first question to answer is, our cameras are, they've got these really powerful computers inside them. They're, matrix metering mode. So why don't we just leave our cameras in aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode? Where the camera is going to take care of the exposure and just leave us to choose those artistic decisions about aperture or shutter speed. And the answer really is in a question. So let's imagine you're in a shooting situation. Say you're taking a portrait of somebody, and maybe it's a sunny day, but you're underneath a large tree, so you're in kind of open shade, and you take your lens cap off, and you meter for them, and I'll explain how to do that in a minute. But you meter for their face, and you get an exposure reading for their face. Say you're shooting at f8. ISO 200, and the shutter speed is at 1/125th of a second. So that will give you an acceptable exposure for their face, and you look on your screen on the back and you go, yep, that looks nice, the colours looks nice, the skin tones look great, I'm happy with that. And then you just shoot away, and you might do a long crop with their whole body, you might get in really close, you might start to turn around, shoot them from different angles, different focal lengths, different zooms, that sort of thing. And the thing that always stays constant is the light on their face. It's not changing. And so your exposure shouldn't change, should it? However, if you're in one of the automatic modes, say you're in aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode or full automatic or program mode, as you move around and their face becomes a different percentage of the scene as a whole, the camera will change the exposure. So let's imagine you're underneath the tree and you're taking a real close-up, you're right close up to them just to get their face. If you're in aperture priority mode and you do that, the camera will go, whoa. Say they've got fair skin, the camera will go, whoa. That's a lot of light in there, and it will darken them down. Let's say you then back up and you do a full body shot, and there's still an open shade, but behind them is then the open area with the bright sunlight, and the camera will see that and go, whoa, this is too bright, and darken the scene down, and their skin will go darker. But that's not what you're looking for, because their skin should always be the same. So that's the power of manual mode. It doesn't let the auto decisions get in the way to spoil the exposure of what you want to be right in your particular photograph. Another example, imagine there's a swan on a lake, and the swan sort of just bobbing along, floating along, and so you set up and you take a reading and you set up your exposure so it's perfect for that swan on this sunny day. So the swan's going and you're taking a beautiful picture of the swan zooming in, looks great. And then the swan decides to fly. So it takes off and it flies along, and you're taking pictures of it, you're dead excited. And it flies past some dark trees, and then it flies past a sunny sky, bright sky, and then it's off into the distance. But your pictures look great because you've stayed in manual mode. However, if you've been shooting in, say, aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode or auto or program mode, what would have happened was you might have got some nice pictures of the swan when it was swimming along, but as soon as it took off and it flew past those dark trees, the camera would have gone, whoa, this is a bit dark. And it would have lightened the scene up as a whole, and the swan, which was white, would have blown out. You'd have lost all the detail. Then when the swan flew across the bright sky, this camera would have gone, whoa, this is too bright. And it would have darkened everything down, and the swan would have probably become a silhouette. When really we know that the exposure on the swan is always the same. So that's another example of where manual mode is best for that kind of situation. Now, obviously, the disadvantage with manual mode is the time it takes you to change the settings when you go from one lighting situation to another. So let's imagine that portrait session we were talking about earlier. We were taking a picture of somebody underneath a tree in open shade, that sort of stuff. We then walk out into the sunshine. We've then got to change our aperture or our shutter speed, or probably our ISO too, and take another reading, and then crack on and start again. And to start off with, this can be a little bit fiddly, but trust me, it all comes with practice. The more you practice you do, the more times you do this sort of thing, what you'll find yourself doing is when you're moving from one lighting situation to the other, you're thinking, well, I'm going from a fairly dark situation to a light situation. So before you even get there, you'll be changing your shutter speed, making it a bit longer, making it a bit shorter if you're going from a dark to a light situation. You'll be closing up your aperture. Maybe you'll be knocking your ISO down from like 400 to 100, that sort of thing. And you'll start doing it automatically, and you'll know when you're out in a bright sunny day. It's a bright sunny day. You won't even have to look at the light meter in your camera. You'll be going, okay, so it's a bright sunny day, sunny 16 rule. If I'm at f16 and shooting at ISO 100, I need a shutter speed of round about pretty close to a hundredth of a second, or 1/125th. And then it really is that simple. Sometimes we get really caught up in the idea that everything has to be absolutely perfect. We have to get our exposure bang on, and we can't trust ourselves. We've got to trust the computers in our cameras, but we don't. A manual mode shows you how to do this. And these changes will really become second nature. Okay, so how does manual mode work? The first thing you need to do is grab your camera manual and just read through the section on how to do manual, and have a play around, because it's going to be different on different cameras. I'm talking about a Canon in this particular case, but it's all roughly the same. So the first thing you tend to do is obviously set your camera to M for manual mode, and then the way I tend to work is I tend to set my ISO next. So the ISO is how sensitive the camera is to light. So if I'm out on a sunny day, I might be looking at 100 or 200. If I then go into the shade of some trees or behind some buildings, it might change to 400. If it's a really overcast day, stormy clouds, or it's getting onto the evening, it could be going up to 800. If I'm hand holding, obviously if you're on a tripod, you don't need to take it up that high. If I'm inside and I'm not using flash, maybe even 800 or 1600 or even 3200 that way. And once you've got your ISO set in, once you've got that dialed in, the next step is really depending on whether you're going down the aperture kind of route for things or the shutter kind of route. So if you're looking for the artistic decision that you're going to be using a short depth of field, a shallow depth of field, so you're doing a nice portrait of someone, or I say a shot of a flower where you want the background out of focus, what you're going to do is you're going to set your aperture first. Or maybe you're doing a landscape where you want everything to be in focus, so maybe you're shooting like f16 or f22, or for the short depth of field you're going to be shooting down at f2.f 3.5, that sort of thing. So you set that first, and then I would tend to recommend you set your metering mode to spot or center weighted. Again, see your manual for that. And all you do then is you just look through your viewfinder, point it at your subject, get it in the middle, and then what you'll see on the camera is that there's normally a line of little dots with some lines on, and then a flashing dot or a moving dot that moves backwards and forwards depending on the shutter speed you're going to choose. And then with Canons, you move the command dial. On this particular camera, it's on the top, might be on the back. And what you're doing there is you're changing the shutter speed to get that little moving dot into the middle. And once it's in the middle, that's an acceptable exposure, and you're done. You can then, run around and start taking your photos and doing things like that. Now, occasionally you may run into a situation where you run out of shutter speed because the shutter speed starts getting a little bit too long. Remember, if you're hand holding anything with a kit lens, anything longer than like a 50th of a second, we might start getting a bit of camera shake blur. So then you want to bump up your ISO, take your ISO from 200 to 400 or 400 to 800, and then start again. But roughly, that's the way you do it. Set your aperture and then check those little lines, which is the light meter, and get it in the middle, and then you're good to go. Alternatively, you might be going for a shutter speed type of look. So you might be going for a really short shutter speed, like 1,000th of a second, to freeze action, or 500th of a second. Or you might be going for, I don't know, like 1/125th or a 60th, because you're going to do some panning shots, to get the subject nice and sharp with the background kind of blurred. So you would put the shutter speed in first, and you do the same thing. So you aim it at your subject, and then you just kind of roll your command dial to change the aperture to get the correct exposure. And once it's dialed in, you're good to go. Again, you might come across the situation where you run out of apertures. So you might not be able to, say, open up the aperture wide enough to let enough light in to get an acceptable exposure. Say you're shooting at 1,000th of a second. You may find that, you just can't get a good enough exposure because your camera opens up to, say, f3.5 on this lens and there's still not enough light. In that case, you need to make your camera more sensitive to light, so you bump the ISO up 200, 400, 800 that way. Or alternatively, it could be that you're trying to shoot at a long shutter speed, like a 1/125th, a quarter of a second, maybe even do like a 1 second or longer exposures, and the aperture can't tighten up enough. It gets to f22 and it's still letting in too much light. In that case, again, you would dump your ISO down, go down to 200, go down to 100. If you need to go beyond that, maybe you're shooting long exposures on a tripod, to get smoky seas, that sort of thing, you're then going to have to look at neutral density filters. But that is a different kind of episode altogether. But, for beginners and people who are dabbling with manual mode now, that's basically it. It's really, really simple. Set your ISO, decide whether you're going to go with an aperture or shutter priority kind of mode within manual. Set the aperture you want for that artistic look, and then adjust your shutter speed to get that little moving bit in the middle. Or set your shutter speed and then move the command dial to get the aperture to get the moving thing in the middle, and then shoot away. And the only time you need to change is when you move into significantly different lighting situations. Okay, so there's manual mode for DSLR. Hopefully I've talked about why you should have a go and give you an insight of how to do it. And the next time you're out with your camera, dial it into M for manual mode and get away from those auto modes. So that's it from me. My name's Rob from robnunphoto.com. If you like the videos, please subscribe and put some comments in the comment section down below. It really helps me, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.